Hello and welcome to Grandma's and Grandpa's Tuning podcast. With me, Jolanta Gallagher, is your host. It is evident that the sound of bells doesn't want to leave us. We explore different instruments pretending to be the bells over the last two episodes. And that little tune comes from the song Who Has Seen the Wind? And the instrument that you heard is a little glockenspiel. A glockenspiel, the word glocken is the bell in German, spiel is the sound, so it's an instrument making the sound of a bell. All right, we also have got a very special guest with us today. Judy, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Jolanta.
And I must tell the listeners that I probably haven't seen you for the last 10 or 15 years since I moved.
Maybe 20 years.
Or maybe even 20 years. I still remember that lovely session we had improvised.
That's right.
Singing session when we were just singing, tuning, harmonizing a cappella without any instruments and making wonderful, wonderful music.
Beautiful sounds, yes.
Yes, it was great. So, Judy, let me introduce you to the listeners. You are one of the most recognized music educators and musicians in Australia, who has been awarded the Order of Australia for her services to music. Judy is also the recipient of many other awards, grants, and fellowships, including Churchill Fellowship and Australia Council for the Arts Composer Fellowship. Tertiary music tutor and consultant, a prolific composer of choral music, as well as operas, chamber music, solo songs, music theatre pieces, and pedagogical pieces. And I understand, Judith, that you are the founder and director of several music organizations and choirs, and also of a music theatre, and that you taught people of all ages, children, adults, and you were preparing groups for performances for national and international tours as teachers and music facilitators in Australia and overseas annually. So those tours took place in Japan, Taiwan, China, and India. What a rich and versatile life you're having and still being very busy. Oh, well, I'm sure you've got so much to share with us today. The focus, I guess, might be on what do you consider your most dominant area of music making? Would that be singing, the choir music, composing, or are they taking an equal stage?
I think I love all of them equally. I'm lucky, I think, because I know quite a lot of excellent musicians who would have preferred if their life could have been purely as a performer, but they found the necessity to teach in order to make enough money to survive. Whereas I'm a very lucky person. I love teaching for its own sake, as well as making music for its own sake, if you see what I mean. So
yes.
I feel very fortunate that because I really enjoy the process of helping a person or a group of people advance in their understanding and skills in music, I find that exciting. So I couldn't say which I love more. I love teaching music. I love making music, creating myself being a performer. My singing voice used to be, a solo potential voice. I've sung many solos in my life, but as I get older, it's becoming less reliable in that way. So maybe my singing days are numbered. I'm playing recorder still and other wind instruments and other early instruments. I enjoy psalteries and dulcimers and bells and those things. And I love composing. I'm still composing, for the last 2 months when I've been in hospital, I've been writing quite a lot of music. And I also love putting many of the art forms together. So that's particularly why I love music theatre, because I can work with words and how words are conveyed. I can add music to the words. I can add visual effects, whether it be mime or dance or sometimes puppets, color, you know, all of those things. So I'm very lucky that I have so many things I love doing. I never get bored.
That's wonderful. And considering the range, the variety, and sheer volume of your activities, and combining it with motherhood, a few decades earlier, I guess, must
Yep.
have been a very demanding task for you.
Well,
How did you cope with that pressure?
yeah, it's funny, you know, I only have the one daughter, and I brought her up by myself. And initially, I was so ignorant of what motherhood would entail. I assumed I would have to stop being a musician. I assumed that my mothering would have to become center stage and it totally, you know, eat all my time up. And so for about maybe 6 months or something, that was my mindset. And then I gradually began to realize, no, 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 no. A lot of music can happen around the edges of being a mother. Still, many, many things can happen. And it was actually very interesting. The more my child became able to take note of what I was doing, the more I loved singing to her, with her, getting her to do little rhythmic things with me, you know. And so the more I noticed her development, the more I realized that being a mother is actually a wonderful way to uh, develop one's music education skills.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And the most precious student was this one,
That's
your
right.
child. And Judith, in spite of those challenges, being a single mother and having such an intensive life artistically, you managed to reach the peak of musical achievements, and you have received the Order of Australia, very high, very high distinctions in the artistic life, musical life. Would you like to tell us a little bit more how you felt when you heard about this award?
I was pretty amazed. I wasn't very old. I was in my 40s, and that's not very old. You know, I see people nowadays getting Orders of Australia in their 70s, and I think that's probably more what one expects, you know, that it comes at the end of many decades. But I think probably I had, before I had my daughter, I had been right from, in fact, before I left school, I had been conducting choirs. I loved singing choral music so much. I was very lucky that I met choral singing through a very good teacher at my high school. And so I just totally loved it. And whenever I could, I would grab other teenagers and ask them to sing Bach chorales or whatever I could find to sing with me. And they thought I was very strange because they would rather do different things in their spare time. But that was what I loved the most. And so I kept on looking for people who would sing with me. And then eventually I would form choirs. And I formed a children's choir at a little church where I was in Canberra. I'd moved from Sydney to Canberra when I was 18 because my family moved. And I was helping at a church, and there were all these little children, and I was looking after the 9-year-olds, and they all, I'm just lucky, they all sang in tune. You don't always find children of that age all singing in tune, but I was just lucky. This little group of about 10 children sang in tune. So I wrote arrangements of folk songs for them, and we performed them at the church fete and things like that. And it was wonderful. And these children loved it. And I had to then go to Sydney for a year because Canberra did not offer a diploma of education in those days. You had to go to Sydney. When I'd finished my degree, I had to move to Sydney for a year to study education. And the children in my little choir said, "Oh, no, 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 you can't go." And I said, "I have to go, but when I come back, we'll make it a proper choir." And so when I came back from that year, I advertised in the newspaper and said I was looking for children who loved singing. And I was very ignorant in those days, I must confess, of what singing is, what humans find it easy, what humans find it more difficult, what makes it you know, work well for some people and not work so well for other people. I didn't know. I hadn't studied. I hadn't read. I hadn't been to conferences. You know, I was just this young adult loving singing. And so I auditioned the children, and I must confess, I turned them away if they couldn't sing Silent Night while I sang the alto, if they couldn't sing the melody perfectly correctly while I sang the alto, without one single hesitation.
So you were a perfectionist at that
I
stage.
was a perfection, because you see, I was so ignorant. I thought children or anyone, any human, either can do this, in which case good, be in a choir, or they can't do this, in which case maybe go and do horse riding or something different. You know, I really was ignorant. Later on, many decades later, I understood how bad what I had done was.
It's an admission of guilt. And then you learned that actually that ability can be developed, did it?
Well, yes. What I did, you see, by saying to the children who were not perfect, please, no, you can't join this year. You can try again next year. I ended up with a group of children who were incredible. And so very easily I could write anything for them and they could perform it excellently. And they became the best choir in Australia. I mean, you know, seriously, we won every competition we went into. We were on television all the time. We sang for the Queen and the Princess Anne and blah, blah. And we made a record that became golden because it sold over 1 million copies and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So that was a beautiful, marvelous choir. It was called the Canberra Children's Choir. In those days, the word children meant anyone who was still at school. Not nowadays, it tends to mean anyone who's still at primary school or even younger than that. But in those days, in the 60s, the word children meant right up to 18 or so. So I had this wonderful range of young people. And when the boys' voices broke, they stayed with me, and we had an SATB choir as well as an SSA choir.
Yes,
And
can you explain to the listeners what those letters mean?
yes, well, most choirs, if you say a children's choir, it usually means we're going to have high voices or sopranos and middle voices or mezzos and lower voices, but still like a child's voice or a woman's voice, called altos. And so you say SSA usually, meaning soprano, soprano, alto. And that's what most children's choirs would consist of. And then if you have boys whose voices change, sometimes they change very much and go very deep, and then we might call them a bass. Sometimes they might change less and just go lower, but not so deep as a bass, and then we might call them a tenor. Sometimes they remain an alto for a long time. And so then we say soprano, alto, tenor, bass, SATB. So my children's choir in the end had groups of both sorts, both excellent. And I remember we were at the first National Choral Festival in Hobart in 1976, and my children's choir were performing a very difficult piece of music by Benjamin Britten called Green Broom. It was on the program, and we're also doing a piece by Bruckner and a piece by, let me think who it was, Bruckner, Britten, and that's right, a Renaissance, very complicated madrigal. And these three pieces were all the sort of pieces that an excellent adult choir would work hard at to perfect. Well, my excellent teenagers were perfect. And I remember hearing the people in the audience reading the program before we sang, saying, this is ridiculous. A children's choir doing Bruckner, children's choir doing Green Broom by Britten, how ridiculous. And so they got up and were perfect. And the audience were just totally stunned. So this was the sort of choir that I ran. And I also, many of my young people were not learning an instrument. Some of them were, but some of them weren't. And so I began running a summer school every January, where I asked friends of mine who were instrumentalists of different sorts to come and teach their instrument intensively for 2 weeks, 2 hours a day on an instrument. And we would try and borrow instruments for the children that they could experience, a violin or a flute or whatever it might be, for this intensive time. And then after that, one hoped that their family might buy or hire one and get them lessons. And this was called the Summer Music School for Children. And I ended up with about 400 children coming every January. And I would get adults from all around Australia. I'd advertise for music teachers to come and be part of this. And I'd get wonderful adults from all over Australia coming to teach with me. And I would audition the children right through November and December to put them in the correct groupings. I didn't want classes of bigger than 5 at a time learning an instrument. And then we would have also bigger groups for singing or ensemble playing or all sorts of different ways. We had so many different options. We had electronic music, we had non-Western music, we had improvisation, many things. So it was a wonderful thing. It's now actually, it never stopped. It changed its name in 1975 to the Young Music Society. So it still operates in Canberra every January and sometimes other parts of the year as well. So the combination of my Canberra Children's Choir being this excellent performing body and the summer music schools, which were, using many adults and many children from all around Australia every year. I think it was a combination of those two things that led to somebody recommending me for this Order of Australia in 1986.
Yes, it's definitely a remarkable achievement, Judith. Congratulations. And you've mentioned singers learning other instruments, which is great to extend their skills. But we also have to admit that the human voice is in itself a beautiful organic instrument.
Absolutely.
And not many people might realize, or some people may not realize, that what they've got, it's a potentially very unique, very precious instrument, their own voice.
That's true.
Vocal cords, and that the fact that they need to look after it and they can develop that instrument beautifully. And so what do you think of the importance of music, generally speaking? And if you'd like to talk about singing in particular, what importance that music making have in people's life? How much does that change people's lives? I know how it affected you. You're so passionate and you're a natural musician and performer and composer. But people who don't sing maybe at all or sing in the shower very occasionally, how would you explain that there is so much more to singing and music making?
Yes, I think in our, if we can say Western society, meaning the sort of culture that we in Australia now have, which we borrowed from Europe on the whole, and England, and so on. So if we say that as Western society, for the last couple of hundred years, maybe for the last 300 or 400 years, Western society has abandoned the notion that singing is as much a part of one's daily life as eating and sleeping. Whereas the societies which one would not say were Western have hung on to that notion much longer. So in my travels around the world nowadays, I become so happy when I find a culture where singing is absolutely still totally normative for every person in a society, down to the babies. It isn't regarded as a special thing you have to learn. It's just what everybody does because it makes you feel wonderful when you can use your voice to express yourself, especially in a group of your community. And for instance, when I was in Taiwan some years ago, I had not realized until recently that in Taiwan there are indigenous Taiwanese people. I hadn't realized this. They're Polynesian and separate from the people who came from China, who of course are the Han people. And so you've got these different backgrounds between, the two groups. And I met the indigenous people because one of the girls in the choir I was running in Taiwan has a father who is an indigenous man. And so her family invited me to the village where they came from. And it was this wonderful, wonderful experience of, first of all, my student, Adomo, who at that time, she was about 15, she had been for some years now sitting with all the old women of the village, learning all their songs. And then she would meet up with all the children of the village and teach the children because she's a wonderful teaching girl. This 15-year-old, she's now about 17, 18. She's wonderful as a teacher herself. So she would learn all these songs and then she'd teach them to the children. And when I and my friends were in their village square, Adomo brought out all the young children and they performed these songs. And it was just for them, just like walking and talking, just what you do. And
Yes.
And then the grandmothers joined in, and then the fathers came along and they did theirs with some dancing. And the whole thing was just wonderful. And it wasn't supposed to be something that you have been taught how to do, you just learn it by listening.
Yes,
And
that was the way of
yeah,
life. Basically, music was part of everyday life. And what I think, and you, I'm sure you've seen it, you observed that music can bond people across all the generations. So we're talking about this sense of belonging for everyone.
Totally wonderful. So I think that if only we could persuade all of the people in a society like Australia or England or any other Western society, persuade them that singing is what we're all given as a wonderful way to communicate with others. And we don't have to be as amazing as the people we hear on CDs or on the radio. I think that's one of the troubles, that recorded music has made everybody feel that that's the only people who ought to be listened to.
And can sing.
Yeah, they're the people who are somehow enabled or allowed to be listened to, whereas the rest of us are necessarily inferior and should keep our mouths shut. I think that's an undercurrent of, that's what people believe nowadays.
That's right. So the sense of inclusion, sense of the societal inclusion and cohesion, such an important part of life, really particularly when the reality seems to be dividing us and separating us.
Exactly. You know, in previous decades, I suppose there were more situations where singing was normalized, like churches were more perhaps frequented in the previous decades. And even if people were not, you know, extremely good harmony singers, they would still make a noise on the tune. You know, it was still considered okay in the 50s, 40s, 30s to sing the tune in the church. And through the 60s and 70s and 80s, it became less what people did. And nowadays, it's very few people, I think, that could say that's part of their normal weekly life, singing like that. And if you go to something like a birthday party nowadays, you'll hear an awful sound of random notes when they try to sing happy birthday. You know, it's because that's, for many people, that's the once a year that they have to make some sort of sound out of their voice box. It's sad. But if only they would understand how wonderful it is when you can all come together like this. It's the most uplifting thing. And then when it is something that you do very frequently, the better, you know, the more you do it, the better it becomes, like everything. And when it becomes really sort of frequently indulged in, then of course everyone's pitch normalizes, everybody is singing the same notes as each other, and then the sound becomes beautiful. And then you're creating beauty. And creating beauty is such a wonderful gift. You know, if we look around us, we can see beauty in the world. To be able to create beauty in sound by consciously working together to be as beautiful as we can, that's a fantastic thing to do, and gives the people doing it the same feeling, I suppose. I've never played soccer, but probably the same feeling that a soccer team has when they've won a game, you know?
That's right, the connection with others, but also being part of something so aesthetically appealing and moving our highest emotions.
Yes.
That's all really connected, isn't it? And I just wonder, maybe some people believe that starting to learn music at an advanced age, it's too late. I guess that, you know, from your experience, you can say that it's never too late.
Never too late. I've had quite a few older people come to me in their 60s or even older. And often it's people whose children studied music, and maybe often it's men, not always, but very often it's men who, when their voice changed, they just stopped trying to sing and thought that that's something that children and women might do, but they didn't have to do it. And so then decades go by with that never being used. And then maybe when they're 60 and they've retired, or they're 70, and they notice their children and maybe even their grandchildren loving making music, and they feel left out. And so I've sometimes had these men come to me, most frequently men, but sometimes women, saying, can you help me? Can you help me sing? And yes, I say it'll take a year. I say to them, you'll need to have a piano or a keyboard in your home. and you'll need to do exactly what I ask you to do every day of your life for the next year. Like, I give them very little exercises, beginning with whatever sound comes out of their mouth when they just make a very, one sound. And from that one sound, we then go up one step. And with those two sounds, we make songs on those two sounds. And we gradually move and we have three sounds. And after a few more months, we have four sounds and so on. So throughout the year. And by the end of a year, they can sing a scale and sing moderate songs. And they usually then run off and join a choir. And it's very, very possible. That's one way, is to find a teacher. Another way is to maybe just by good luck, find some friends who already love singing and sit with them and, sometimes join in and sometimes listen. And after a year or so of sometimes joining in and sometimes listening, it will be less scary. And the less scary it gets, the more likely it is that the person can begin to join in. The biggest thing, I think, is the psychological barrier.
That's right. That's correct. And some reluctance, some believe that, I don't have a good voice, I sing out of tune and so on. And reluctance, in particular amongst boys. How can that be encouraged?
Yes. Well, sometimes I talk to them sometimes about the olden days when, let's say, in the 1600s, when boys were actually sought after. Boys who sang well were sought after and were offered places in the choirs of the big cathedrals. And their parents would say, you're lucky because you'll learn to read and write and you'll get better food, And so in those days, the boys were very lucky. And the girls were not offered this at all in those days. The girls never sang in public. So nowadays, if I say this to a class of children, the boys think, oh, that's pretty special. But
also the boys might actually look up to some idols. So many singers are actually men,
Indeed.
young stars. So playing even a popular music with young singers might be an encouragement.
It's very important that they see men singing, exactly. And another thing I do to help boys is I bring theatre into what we do. And most children enjoy very much plays, stories where you act it out, And if you have a story like, I don't know whether you know Peter Pan, do you know the Peter Pan story?
Yes.
And there are all these interesting groups, there are pirates and there are Red Indians and there are the Lost Boys, and each group has a different sort of atmosphere in the way they would put across their part of the story. And of course, the pirates have to be as rough and tough as you like. And so if one has a simple pirate song that doesn't really matter what it sounds like, and you get all the boys in your group to sing it, then they will happily do it.
Yes.
They're not caring what sort of noise they make because it's part of the story,
That's right, and a positive identification with those
characters. That's right. And there's another story you might know called The Wind in the Willows. Do you know that?
Yes, I do.
And there are these strange little creatures based on, English creatures, like there's a rat and a mole and so on. And Toad is this very, very wayward character. And so the song I've written for Toad, any boy would love doing that because down with Toad, I forget the rest of it, but it's very rough and tough, and they're all happy to sing that, and they would all like to be the character if we acted out, Yeah. So if one can find enough things to be acted out where they feel they can identify without being soppy or sissy or whatever they're afraid of being, then it helps them to use their voice in that context. And it's interesting that after a few of these sorts of sessions, after a month or two have gone by, they're singing an ordinary song without even feeling bad about it.
Yes, that's right. And Judith, we know that starting music making early is very, very important. The earlier, the better. Would you like to put some light on that?
Well, there's a very famous music educator that I know you're very aware of called Zoltán Kodály, the Hungarian educator. And he once said, that music education really needs to start 9 months before the birth of the mother. And this is, of course, what it's trying to say is that every little tiny child just being born, if we go backwards before the child is born, then whatever sounds the mother is experiencing or singing herself will be actually absorbed by this new little growing child inside her. I think it's true that the ears are the first sense which develops in the growing fetus. And I think it's the last sense which we lose the last when we're dying. So it's a very important part of our humanity. And this little growing person is going to absorb all the sounds, you know, and then when the little child is actually born, then whatever the mother sings or dances to or plays on an instrument or listens to in any way, that once again will be absorbed by this little child. And one hopes that, you know, ideally the mother will be conscious of this and will therefore make choices that would be beneficial to a child. In other words, it has been proven that more gentle music, more gentle melodic music is better for children and for plants and for animals than loud screaming metallic music, which tends to be less good for the development of growing things. So I think that if every mother were conscious of this and made careful choices of what sort of music she played, either herself or sang herself or listened to herself, then the little child's ears can be gradually developing a love for these sounds. And then, of course, one hopes that the mother will sing with the child. It's funny, you know, when I first had my daughter, I was so ignorant. I hadn't ever read really about what you do with new babies. My mother said to me, sing with her, sing to her, sing with her. And I had been talking to her, but I hadn't at that point sung to her because I'd never really thought about how children develop. I'd been very ignorant of little people and their development. So when my mother told me that, I thought, oh, righto. So I started singing every day instead of talking. So I sang everything. And the more I did, the more I realized how important it was, because this little child became so totally focused on me and then began to sing with me.
That's right. Yes,
it's a wonderful thing.
Yes, so that's the mother and the child. Now you have become a grandma.
Yes.
How can you tell us about your relationship with your grandson?
Yes. Well, when my grandson was first born, it was really fascinating because he had just come home and he was in a little crib, and my son or my daughter, one of them, put the radio on, and an oboe sonata, I think it was Bach, came on. So it was a solo oboe and a harpsichord. And this little tiny baby, the head went like that and focused for every second of this music. Didn't move from that position of focus until the music finished. And then the head just relaxed at the end of it. And I thought, wow, that little child really finds sound important. It was so fascinating. And so I did my best to surround this little child with every musical possibility I could. I'm very lucky because I've got a yurt in the back garden and I'm living in a flat beneath my daughter's home. So I was able to be around my grandchildren in that early phase as well as, you know, continuously. And so I've got a great variety of instruments, and I sing all the time. And so the two children that my daughter has brought into the world haven't been able to escape. You know, I don't know whether you've experienced this. Have you experienced this as a mother yourself, that there's a stage when a child gets embarrassed by its parents singing in public? Have you noticed that?
Oh, yes.
There's a certain stage.
Especially when they're becoming
12 or 13.
Teenage age.
Yes. My daughter used to object when I would be singing walking down the street, and she'd say, Mom, stop it. So I would keep singing. And now, of course, she sings when she walks down the street, and her children say, Mom, stop it.
And they probably value it later in life.
Precisely.
So, yes, Judith, now because some of our listeners may not see their grandchildren very often. It could be just once a week or once a month, a Skype connection. What can grandparents do to nurture that musical contact with their grandchildren when they don't see them? Especially, you know, your voice training seems to be or require a lot of commitment, daily practice. Can the grandparents first maybe sing the songs with the recordings? So at least because of the isolation with so many places around the world, and we've got listeners in 12 countries, Judith. So, so what's the best recipe for nurturing our own skills and abilities at home and then passing it on to grandchildren during whatever contact they've got, whether it's face-to-face or through internet?
Yes. Well, if we talk about face-to-face first, and we'll hope that, you know, the ideal would be that a grandparent can sometimes physically cuddle their grandchildren. That would be the ideal, that sometimes that's possible. Maybe only once every 6 months. But every time that is possible, it would be wonderful if a lot of the time could be spent singing and moving the body as you sing, and clapping or dancing or sharing the joy of a song with the grandchildren. So especially when they're that little age of, you know, age 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that time is when the children really love that communication with an adult of singing a song together. And the songs don't have to be complicated. They can be very simple. You know, this old man, he played knick-knack on my drum, that sort of song. Yes. There are lots of songs which are very simple, some even simpler than that, with only 2 or 3 notes. And the children don't mind how simple. All they love is the communication with the other person. And if you're looking into their eyes and singing with them and bouncing on the rhythm, the beat with them, then it's a wonderful experience. And so that's the ideal, that even if it's only once every 6 months, this could be enjoyed by both of the people. And another thing a grandparent can do is persuade the parents to be taking the children as frequently as possible to places where people are making music live, so they can see that it isn't something that comes out of a machine, it's something that human beings do. So, you know, because maybe the parents aren't people who make music at home, maybe the grandparents can persuade the parents to start singing at home. And if they can just become a little bit braver with their voices, and it sort of almost doesn't matter really if they're a little bit out of tune. It almost doesn't matter. It's better that there's some communication through song than nothing.
Yes, that's a personal expression and the communication between two human beings. Yes,
that's
the bonding effect of it.
Exactly, yes. And then if one is unfortunately totally unable to go to see them because it's, you know, the other side of the world or something like that, then I guess nowadays with all this Zoom stuff, we can do something. We can, you can't really sing together on Zoom because of the time lag, but you can listen to each other. You
that's
can
taking turns.
Yes, that's right, precisely. You can sing a song that has lots of verses when the grandparent can teach the children verse by verse. Maybe it's a story that comes through the song, you know, with many verses. And the grandparent sings verse 1, and then the child sings verse 2, and then the grandparent sings verse 3, and that sort of thing. There are many ways that you can share the singing online.
That's right. And we know that children love animals, and there's so many animal songs, and they invite children to dance and to dance. Exactly. So grandparents might maybe start with the repertoire of animal songs.
That would be a very good idea. And if the grandparent loves making things with, you know, craft sort of things, you could make little glove puppets for a different animal. You could make a variety of animals as glove puppets. So when you have your thumb and your fingers moving like that, it's really the mouth of the creature. Do you know what I mean?
That's right. That's right. And how about engaging young children in a kind of not competition, but taking turns, bringing a new song?
Yes,
into
absolutely.
So the child might have that initiative, learn a song, and sing it to a grandparents, for
That's a
example.
very good idea. So if the child is now at school, the child can ask the teacher, do you know any songs about frogs, or do you know any songs about bulls? And maybe the teacher might. And if that teacher doesn't, that teacher might say, I don't, but maybe Mrs. Brown does. Go and ask her. And maybe then the child will find a song one day and say, Grandma or Grandpa, I have a song you're going to learn. And then they sing it online. Then that would be wonderful.
Yes.
And then the grandparent takes it up and learns it and, you know, takes it further with some sort of maybe play acting it out or doing extra in some visual way with it.
That's right. And also integrating it with other arts, like the children also can make puppets or draw the face of an animal on the paper plate and surprise the grandparent on the other side, and maybe show some movements so the grandparent can see the movements on the screen. That's, yes, reciprocal. Yes. Communication. Yes, that's so important.
It's a very simple little song which I do with young ones, you know, like 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds, just about the movement that different creatures have. And I change each verse. I sometimes change into a different key or a different part of my voice. And also I change the speed so it gets slower or faster, depending on the way that creature moves. So verse 1 is elephants walk like this, plod and plod and plod. There's more to the verse, but you know, that's the slow, so you can move your body slowly like that. And then if you do a donkey trots, you could go donkey trots, trots like this, trot and trot and trot. So your voice can go higher and faster. And that's the sort of thing where the grandparent or the child can decide which creature next. And does that creature make a higher sound or a lower sound, or does it make us think of quickness or slowness? And that can be something that they work out between them. And
that's right. And that's right. And also the simple songs are based on just sometimes 2 different sounds or 3 different notes, and that will be the very first ones that the child can learn on very simple instruments. I quite often use the tuned bottles filled up with water. They can make those lovely sounds, like instrumental. Yes.
Which one is it? Sing it for me.
Now, even without instruments, the grandparents can make a simple, like xylophone, filling up the 3 bottles,
the bottles with the water.
And teach them on the correctly.
Yes.
And then the child can play those little songs following the melody going up or down.
That's wonderful. Yes.
Yes, so very simple activities. And now, since we've mentioned animals, before we finish our conversation, you wouldn't believe we've been going for nearly an hour now. I'd like to hear about you. Have you written this song, "The Bush Animals"?
Yes.
That's your own song. So
I wrote this song for my daughter when she was 4 in preschool in Canberra. And I wrote it for her class and they loved it. And I've done it now all around the world with little children of different ages and they all love it. So.
Right. And now, since our listeners do come from other countries than Australia, can you just outline what animals are we going to hear in this song? So it will be a kangaroo to start with.
Yes, I can't remember all of them, but there's certainly a kangaroo and a koala and a wombat and an echidna and a possum and a snake.
Platypus?
Platypus, yes, that's right. So they're all the iconic Australian animals, which I'm sure people anywhere, if they were to look up Australian animals, they would be in the top of the list.
Right.
I haven't gone into the tiny little, very unusual creatures that nobody has heard of. These are all the very, very well-known Australian animals.
And they're very unique. Some of them.
They are. They don't exist
in Australia.
No, they don't exist elsewhere, I think. Yes.
That's right. So, Judith, before we play this song to close our conversation today, is there anything else that you'd like to mention to grandparents? any advice that you'd like to give apart from what we have discussed, any kind of encouragement, any reflections on, how they can cope with some of the stresses of the situations they might find themselves today?
Well, I think if everybody listening, grandparent or parent, or any adult listening, can take away the biggest fact, which is that we all need music. Everybody needs it, especially as the world is becoming such a difficult place to live in nowadays. Then if we all can find that part of ourselves which responds musically to difficulties, it will help us go through our difficulties. In fact, the more one can sing with others, the more one then is strengthened to face whatever lies ahead. And then if you take it further, the more you can find your own expression of what you think needs to be done, or which attitude of mind needs to be fostered. And you could create your own song to bring this about and share it with other people. So it's a very, very central part of our being alive today, I think, is to take music right inside ourselves and to realize it isn't an extra. It isn't just the icing on the cake, it is the cake.
Exactly. And the music gives us this sense of hope and the sense of community, that we are all together. We have to be strong, we have to share, and we have to support one another and enjoy every minute of life, because we can make best out of it all.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you, Judith. There is so much wisdom in what you shared with our listeners, and thank you so much for sharing also the information about how people can enhance their skills, how they can engage musically with younger generation, and how that connection will be a very lasting experience. So thank you so much for the time given to us all. And I'd like to finish with that song composed by you for the children, and it's called The Bush Animals. Bush, just in case some listeners want to know, the bush is a typical Australian, like a forest, mostly composed out of eucalyptus trees in large parts of the country. So here we go, Bush Animals by Judith Clingan, our guest. And Judith, if you can stay, for a verse or two, and then that will be the closure of our episode. Thanks once again. Thanks, Judith.
Thanks, Jolanta.
I just have to find that song now. Let me move to Bush Animals.
Bush animals and the birds of the bush, hush, hush, we won't hurt you. Bush animals and the birds of the bush, we just want to have a look at you. Kangaroo, kangaroo, I can hop as well as you, I can hop as well as you. Kangaroo, kangaroo, won't you be my friend today? Bush animals and the birds of the bush, hush, hush, we won't hurt you. Bush animals and the birds of the bush, we just want to have a look at you. Koala bear with fuzzy hair, I can see you hiding there. Koala bear with fuzzy hair, won't you be my friend today? Bush animals and the birds of the bush, hush, hush, we won't hurt you. Bush animals and the birds of the bush, we just want to have a look at you. Long-legged emu, I can't run as fast as you, I can't run as fast as you. Long-legged emu, won't you be my friend today?